Dr. Louwerse, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Louwerse is a professor of cognitive psychology and artificial intelligence at Tilburg University and also a professor by special appointment at Maastricht University. So he will be giving a talk on embodied conversational agents. So, Professor, please.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me for this wonderful event. I'm going to talk a little bit about a slightly different topic than Chris was talking about. He was going over very specific details. I'm going to take a journey a little bit higher over, ending with the space journey. But let me start out with the conclusions. That's always helpful. Then you can basically fall asleep and wake up after 20 minutes again. So I'm going to argue that cognitive science should not be ignored in artificial intelligence research, that building collaborations is critical in AI research, and that the gap between basic and applied AI research is basically an illusion. And the more you disagree with me, the better, because I'm looking forward whether I've convinced you towards the end of this presentation that these conclusions might actually hold. So let me start out with the first one, cognitive science and AI. Well, as I guess the participants at this conference know, AI is not a new hype. It started almost 70 years ago at Dartmouth at a summer research project where a group of researchers said, well, let's think about thinking machines. What people don't often know is that a few weeks after that workshop, there was another workshop at MIT where more or less the same participants at the Dartmouth workshop were present. And that was the launch of cognitive science, where a group of interdisciplinary researchers said, well, let's not only think about thinking machines, but also about computational humans. So from a slightly different perspective, they addressed basically the same question. And I think the two interdisciplinary fields often go hand in hand, and too often, particularly nowadays, that tends to be forgotten. And I think that's going to be important. And the reason why is nicely illustrated by my colleague Mike Jones at Indiana University. He argues within the cognitive sciences, we've been considerably more skeptical of big data's promise, largely because we place such a high value on explanation over prediction. A core goal of any cognitive scientist is to fully understand the system under investigation, rather than being satisfied with a simple descriptive or predictive theory. And particularly in the age of explainable AI, I think that's critical. Now, the irony is that if you look at introduction artificial intelligence textbooks, you see that cognitive science is a subfield of AI. And in handbooks of cognitive science, you see that AI is a subfield of cognitive science. I don't care which path you choose. I think it's important to keep that interdisciplinary perspective in mind. Let me make that a little bit more concrete and focus on natural language processing. So as you all know, GPT-3 is a pretty impressive NLP model. The same is true for DALL-E for image processing. GPT-3 has been used a lot for natural language processing tasks. And its architecture is a standard transformer with an unprecedented size of 170 billion parameters. That's deeply impressive. Now, often it's also claimed that it accomplishes a variety of NLP tasks in a human-like way. Now, here I want to put my finger on a human-like way. Well, that's questionable because humans don't perform the way machines often perform. In fact, we take shortcuts. We never go for the full route. We often take the shortcut routes. We are cognitively lazy, pretty much. And that's what I've argued in my popular science book, Keeping Those Words in Mind, How Language Creates Meaning. Quite often AI models go for the maximal performance, the optimal performance, and in many tasks that's going to be absolutely critical. But there seems to be a distinction from the way humans work. Now, if you don't believe me, let me give you an example. I'm going to present you with red dots and green dots in a sequence. And at the end of the sequence, I'm going to ask you what the most likely color is, red or green. So here we go. Now, that's a simple task on a Wednesday morning. And most people would choose green. And if you selected green as the next color, then the good news is you're not an animal or a machine. The bad news is that you're just wrong. So the most likely circle, obviously, is going to be red because the majority of the circles were red. So the probability of having a red circle is considerably larger, particularly if there's no pattern in the data. And in this particular case, there's no pattern in the data. However, humans, unlike machines and animals, choose for patterns. We are pattern matchers. We love patterns. And when it comes to language processing, we rely on these patterns. And that's a good thing. We take cognitive shortcuts because we rely on patterns in the data source. And if that's the case, the mechanisms are often perhaps even more important than the computational model itself. And that doesn't mean that I'm downplaying the AI models on NLP or any other fields, but I think it's important to keep those mechanisms in mind. Let me give you an example, a silly example, but a real world example because we published on this. So imagine that you have Lord of the Rings. Would it be possible to take the text of Lord of the Rings and create a map of Middle-earth with the longitude and latitude of the cities in Middle-earth? Now, you can address this from a computational an AI point of view and have powerful models like GPT-3 and see whether you can actually train models to make that happen. In order to create a map of Middle-earth. But humans use a different strategy, at least one of the strategies that they're using. And that's an extremely dumb strategy. They basically say, you shall know a word by the company it keeps. So all it does is looking at similarities between different words on the basis of the co-occurrences of words. And then suddenly your computational model needs to be far less powerful to obtain very similar results. Now, the Lord of the Rings example may be a little bit far-fetched, although it was kind of fun to see whether you can take Lord of the Rings and create a map of Middle-earth. But we've done the same thing of creating maps of, for instance, the United States with the longitude and latitude of cities in the United States using the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Los Angeles Times. Using not so powerful computational models, but taking advantage of the patterns in the data. So if you take advantage of the patterns in the data and combine that with powerful models, imagine what would be possible. Now, if you say, well, wonderful, a map of the United States and a map of Lord of the Rings, where's the practical application? Well, we've also extended this to intelligence research. You can apply this to social media and basically get longitude and latitudes in defense analysis. And if you think that that's a little bit too aggressive, we've also helped archaeologists with excavation sites. For instance, if you take the Indescript, using these very simple algorithms, you're able to tell archaeologists, well, this is most likely the excavation site of this particular tablet on the basis of the model that we trained. So my point again is when you're thinking about artificial neural networks, keep the mechanisms in mind, or better, at least do not ignore them. So cognitive science should not be ignored in AI research. I haven't addressed the building collaborations and the gap between basic and applied research, although perhaps I did with the last example of the Indescript tablets and the intelligence opportunities. I'm going to focus on two projects that we are currently conducting, where we're building animated conversational agents, embodied conversational agents. We're doing that in a project called Vibe. That sounds a little bit cooler than virtual humans in the Brabant economy, the province where Tilburg University is located. So let's keep it at Vibe. Now, if you're looking at these agents over the years, perhaps you remember Clippy, the annoying Microsoft agent that kept knocking on your screen. When I tell my students about Clippy, they look at me as if I'm from a historic age. So perhaps it's a good thing if you don't recall Clippy as I do. When I was working in the United States, we were working on intelligent tutoring systems, basically animated conversational agents that could have an interaction with the user. However, at that time, we had some machine learning algorithms, but it was very, very limited. It was more or less scripted. Yet we were able to provide personalized education on a variety of topics with a relatively simple agent. But since time has changed, we are now able to build virtual humans, real-like virtual humans, have sophisticated speech recognition and speech synthesis modules, and have sophisticated dialogue management modules implemented. So the Vibe agent currently operates within the healthcare sector, both to provide 24 hours, 7 days a week advice to patients, not replacing a doctor, but basically being complementary to the expert. I mean, the expert is not going to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to address some answers to general questions, and the more specific questions the human can actually answer to make sure that the system doesn't make any mistakes. But the agent is also going to be used for training purposes. So for instance, what you see here is Victoria. And Victoria is a mannequin that is used for gynecology training, both nurses as well as doctors. And Victoria is very lifelike from the waist down. So it's as natural as it can be to make it optimal for training purposes at Maxima Medical Hospital. However, from the waist up, Victoria is not so natural, as you can see. So the head doesn't show any facial expressions. In fact, you can argue it's hardly human. And yet those nonverbal cues are going to be critical for training healthcare professionals. So one of the things that we build is virtual humans that have sweating, have a pale skin, in order to train medical personnel on those facial expressions. And as you know, nowadays, those the virtual humans get more and more natural. What you're looking at here is not a real human, but it's actually a virtual human, as natural as it can become. Now, if you think, do they all look that pretty? No, they don't all look that pretty. Here's a guy that doesn't look as pretty. This is me. But the challenge, of course, is going to be, how can you operate these virtual humans? How can you make sure that not only the speech recognition works, but the system also knows how to respond in a particular way? Now, of course, you can use neural networks for that. You can use artificial neural networks. We've used RASA for that purpose. And when it comes to precise information, AI models are perfect dealing with that. However, yet again, humans are not precise. We are extremely scruffy, cognitively, but also in dialogue. So here's an example of an actual dialogue, the way that humans utter it. Now, none of these turns are grammatical in any way. In fact, it's all over the place. And we don't seem to have a problem having a dialogue with one another. So I'm not arguing dismiss those AI models like RASA and MPNet and others we've tried, but make sure that you're not throwing out the cognitive baby with the bathwater. So again, cognitive science should not be ignored in AI research, I think, and building collaborations is critical in AI research. And the Vibe project is a good example of that, given the fact that we're working together with medical hospitals, with technology firms, and knowledge institutions to make sure that not only we can build those agents, but we can also put it in the healthcare sector. And hence my point that the gap between basic and applied AI research is actually an illusion. Now I'm going to take you to another project. Perhaps this is my pet project because it seems to be so powerful for younger generations.
man, look at that picture over there. There's the earth coming up. Wow, that's pretty. Oh, that's a beautiful shot.
Can you guys see this? Yeah, seriously.
Consider again that dot. That's home. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam.
I'm excited to share my personal experience with the next generation and offer them a new perspective on our planet. We are all astronauts of Spaceship Earth. Join us.
So a couple of years ago, the non-profit organization SpaceBuzz, located in the Netherlands, came to us because of our work in virtual reality. And they said, we plan to build a rocket ship and drive to schools across the Netherlands. And since then, we've been heavily involved in the SpaceBuzz initiative because it's so cool. So what started as a crazy idea has now led to 3 rocket ships that are driving around, not only in the Netherlands, but across Europe and in fact, over the world. So it consists of an educational program with a pre-flight program where children are trained to become astronauts by hanging upside down on a balance beam, experiencing gravity, and with oven mitts making particular puzzles as real astronauts do, writing an application letter in order to become an astronaut. And once they pass the astronaut training, and everybody passes, the rocket ship arrives in front of their school and they're launched into space. They enter the rocket ship, sit down in hydraulic chairs, put on their virtual reality headsets, and are launched into space in an orbit around the Earth. Once they come back from their space journey, there's going to be a post-flight program where they are having press conferences with friends and family to basically tell them what they have experienced, like real astronauts do. Now, the project is supported by ESA astronaut André Kuipers, European Space Agency astronaut André Kuipers, who felt that he should give back to what he experienced as one of the selected few to many, many children. But if you think about this, you can take this considerably further. You can build serious games and present that to children as a complementary to what they experience in a classroom. You can build intelligent tutoring systems, building that virtual human approach that I just talked about. So we have a scan-in version of André Kuipers, the national hero in the Netherlands. But of course, elsewhere in the world, in Turkey, various other countries, you have their own national hero. So what are the ways to use photogrammetry techniques to build a virtual human that is the national hero of the country? And if you combine that intelligent tutoring system with the NLP techniques that I just talked about and build a system with good dialogue management that is basically an intelligent tutoring system, you're able to provide personalized education. So any child, any student can have his or her own course because by now we know that children, adults don't learn in exactly the same way. And yet our educational system is built in a way that everybody is supposed to learn in exactly the same way. Moreover, if you use stealth assessment techniques, neurophysiological responses, for instance, heart rate, galvanic skin, but you can even go as far as brain imaging, you can build sort of a feedback loop. You can have brain-computer interaction, so the simulation that children experience is strictly personalized and adadapts itself to the learning process in a particular child. As I mentioned before, we started in the Netherlands, relatively small. We're a nonprofit organization, so we live on donations, and yet the rocket ship, the large rocket ship, is pretty expensive in terms of personnel, but also in terms of gas. So not the best business model, and yet we managed to serve some 25,000 children already. Not only in the Netherlands, but also in Belgium, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Hungary. We went to the United States and are likely return to the East Coast next year. Meanwhile, there's interest from Australia, as well as South America and various other countries in the world.
Well, I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
You can now put on your space helmet.
Welcome to space.
You can experience things that you think you'd never see. The ocean is just so blue. It's nice.
We're going at like a super high speed up to space to see the big blue and green beautiful Earth.
So this Spacemas experience actually made me feel quite as though I was back in space.
That was even more amazing than real space flight.
When I was in space, being able to look down at the Earth and realizing that I'm looking down at 7 billion people, and our job is to take care of each other and take care of our environment at the same time.
And the fact that the space buzz pulls up to their school and takes them to space is going to be something that changes their lives.
That was amazing.
I think it should be something that every human being, young and old, get to see. Of course, children will really enjoy it and will take this experience to heart, but I think we should take it to UN and make all the world leaders do the same thing.
So, as I said, we've traveled to both the US and recently returned from France. Back to those conclusions. So I think cognitive science should not be ignored in AI research. I'm a strong proponent of explainable AI, not in all cases. I can imagine that for the financial markets, you may not necessarily need to know mechanisms, but as soon as it involves human behavior, I think you ought to understand the mechanisms. Building collaborations is critical in any research, including AI research. I think the field is fundamentally interdisciplinary. And moreover, the often perceived gap between basic and applied research, both from knowledge institutions as well as corporations, I think it is an illusion. I've often argued that the difference between basic and applied research lies in time. That's perhaps the only difference. I don't know when basic research gets applied, but it will be applied at some point in time. And that's where I'm going to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Louwerse, for this inspiring and thought-provoking presentation. Actually, I have several questions for you, but unfortunately, our time is up. If you have any...
You can answer them by, you can address them by email, and I'm happy to respond.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will be reading your book, by the way.